Princess Aurora and her tiny kinfolk are trying to survive life in the wilderness. How cute. Definitely nothing disturbing lying around nearby. They must build homes, find food, and make friends with the forest animals. Adorable. Wait, is that girl eating a maggot? Anyway, these little critters are just a big ball of fun. Hold on, did they just bury that girl alive? I must have misread that. What the hell are they eating here? And what happened to that kid? Is that a human corpse? Did this girl just eat her friend whole and then pretend she was pregnant? What the hell is this? Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today I'll be walking you through Beautiful Darkness, a twisted graphic novel that can be described as a mix between Thumbelina, The Borrowers, and Lord of the Flies. Similar to Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, the cutesy storybook aesthetic is deceptive. While we follow Aurora and her wholesome, positive approach to leading this tiny community, a child's body is slowly decomposing in the background, and these little people seem to be a lot more sinister than it seems. I'll be going through the whole story start to finish, as well as covering popular fan theories at the end. So let's just get into it. This is Beautiful Darkness Explained. The story begins with Aurora waiting for Prince Hector to arrive. The two sit together and enjoy a slice of cake served by Plim, Aurora's little sidekick and friend. By the way, doesn't Plim look exactly like the Japanese cartoon character Shin-chan? I can't tell if it was intentional or just coincidence. Anyway, the prince says that Aurora has made quite an impression on him and she blushes. The two compliment each other and move in for a smooch, but suddenly something falls from the ceiling into Hector's tea. Next, a giant pink blob falls onto Plim's head. It appears that the soft structure they're in is collapsing around them. The three try to escape and Aurora is separated. She's trapped in a dark corner alone, and the gooey pink substance begins filling up the space until she almost drowns in it. But at the last second, she begins to dig her way out above her. She finds herself standing out on the rain on top of the structure. However, she slips and goes tumbling off the side, landing in a puddle below. Behind her, we see the structure she was on, which looks like a girl's face. Many more little people come crawling out of the huge head from its mouth and nose into the rain. They all run to find shelter, and we finally get a good look at what they were emerging from. The corpse of a little girl. That's one hell of a way to start off this comic and lets you know exactly what kind of unsettling world this is. After a black title page with Beautiful Darkness in its beautiful font, we see Aurora wandering through the woods. The rain has stopped and the sun is now shining on the green plant life. She calls out for the others, walking past the legs of the dead girl and her spilled bag. Finally, she gets a response. Plim and some other tiny people are hiding under a tree. She waves to them and notices something glimmering in the sun nearby. There's a woman in red digging through the giant bag with a pair of scissors. Inside, she seems to have found some cookies. Aurora approaches the woman and timidly says hello, and that the food looks really good. She says after everything she went through last night, she's pretty hungry. So the woman in red tells her to help herself to the rest, leaving 2 huge cookies behind and leaving with her giant pair of scissors. Plim comes running down to Aurora, excited at the sight of the snacks. She sends him to tell the others that they've found food. On top of the giant dead girl is the woman in red. She takes a bandage off the girl's leg and uses it as a belt, which she stores her big scissors in. This lady seems to know what she's doing. Later, Aurora has taken on a leadership role. Her and Plim have made a tent out of the huge bag and are serving pieces of the cookies to a line of hungry people. There's all kinds of different little people being served, including children, a baby, and a really big girl that's twice the size of everyone else. In the distance, Aurora spots Hector the prince. She leaves Plim to continue serving and runs to him. As Aurora searches for Hector, she passes by a strange blonde girl with big, creepy wide eyes, clinging to the dead girl's hand and screaming, while 2 others try to pull her away. Aurora finds Hector, and we get the sense that the guy is pretty full of himself. He doesn't seem that glad to see Aurora, and instead asks her if she was worried about him. And when she explains how she's taken charge, he's not even really listening to her and is clearly distracted. Nearby, there seems to be a commotion, and Aurora goes to see what's up. A girl named Zelly is crying about her ankle. She says she fell while running from a horrible creature, which is actually just a harmless beetle. Aurora walks over to it and just casually kicks it aside with almost no effort. Zelly thanks her for saving her life, and the group of girls all look adoringly at Aurora, their leader. She advises Zelly not to stay out in the hot sun or she'll get a heat stroke, but Zelly's being a big baby about her ankle, which looks perfectly fine. As she continues crying, Aurora helps make her a tent using a nearby notebook from the dead girl. On its cover is the name Aurora. This is an interesting detail that we'll touch back on when I go over story theories later, but for now, let's move on. Aurora walks towards a tall hill to watch the sunset. You'll notice she passes under a girl with black hair. I actually didn't notice this on my first read through, but we'll meet her later. later. Aurora looks out at the beautiful sky and decides she's done for today. We see the moonlight bouncing off the dead girl's skin as the little people sleep in their makeshift tents and sleeping bags. Suddenly they hear a scream and some loud stomping. A cat has come into the area and is sniffing for food. Outside, one of the small people is sleeping in a nearby tree. Well, the cat has found its dinner. We see it climb up the tree and the person screams in terror before being carried away in the cat's mouth. The next morning, the group all wake up realizing they don't have any more food. A kid with an afro runs up to Plim, overjoyed to see him, and Plim is like, do I know you? It's such a weird moment, it made me laugh. They decide they need some rope and a couple of critters start pulling hair off the dead girl's corpse. The creepy blonde feral girl from earlier is still yelling incoherently and tries to stop them from taking it. They get some anyway and start playing jump rope with it. We then see the black-haired girl from earlier. Her black hair and bendy limbs remind me of Marceline from Adventure Time. Anyway, she finds a crying baby alone in the woods and can't find its parents, so she decides she'll have to take care of it. It seems some time has passed and we see the bigger girl and some others hanging out by the giant's rotting corpse. Flies and maggots are now surrounding it, and a girl in green is laughing at how the larvae tickle her feet. The cutesy art style makes this scene really unsettling. The girls talk about how hungry they are and hope that Aurora will bring some food, mentioning that she had brought them berries and mushrooms before, although the smallest of them says they no longer eat mushrooms since they found out some of them are deadly. The girl in green replies, "Oh yeah, that's true. Poor Josephine, Margot, and Agatha. I like them." Then they continue saying, "Poor Sweetie and Adelaide, and Mimi and Juju and Astrid, also Tubby, Celeste, and Stinker. Oh, and Wilson. My god, so I guess a huge chunk of the remaining people are dead now." They go back to complaining about being hungry, and the little one says at least they'll never stoop so low as to eat like that gross pig. She points nearby and we see the feral girl munching down on a maggot and hiding by the giant corpse's head. It's a really creepy image. This chick just isn't right. But then again, she seems to be the only one who acknowledges the corpse, so who knows. While the smallest girl continues to complain about the disgusting behavior, the large girl mentions again how hungry she is, and then picks up the tiny girl and just tosses her in her gullet and eats her. The girl in green freaks out for a second, but then the big girl asks if she wants to play since now it looks like she's pregnant. She grabs the big girl's belly and says, "Oh, I can feel the baby move." And the big girl says, "Call me mommy." I mean, what the fuck? Somehow that's the most disturbing thing so far. Next, we see Aurora sitting in a small cave and talking to a mouse that's wearing clothes. It just squeaks at her and she says, "No thanks, I'll pass on the mud," but she does take some berries with her. As she leaves, the mouse blocks the exit and screeches at her. She simply adjusts his tie and assures him that she'll be back again later. I guess this calms him down and he lets her leave. This is a weird book, I gotta say. Plim and another girl are waiting outside, happy to see her, and they compliment her for learning mouse language. We then see a few incidents involving the other little people. 3 identical triplets are climbing up a tree. One of them tells the other 2 to quit copying her all the time and that this was her idea. She climbs into a bird's nest with some baby birds, waiting for the mother bird to come back. Her twins watch from the ground below, saying, "Wow, this really was a good idea." The mother bird arrives and starts to feed the babies with bugs, and it does mistake the little triplet for its baby. But when it goes to feed her, the bird shoves its beak down her throat and we see her neck bulge out. Afterward, blood starts pouring out of her mouth as she chokes. Now that's disturbing. The other twins don't seem all that concerned, saying, "I guess it wasn't such a good idea after all." Next, we see a boy in red searching around from a high spot on a tree and yelling that there's no danger in sight. Kinda weird. It cuts back to the triplet who got her throat punctured, moaning and wandering through the woods at night. Next, a boy tries to teach a ladybug to shake hands, but accidentally rips its arm off. He looks at it in shock for a second, but then chases the ladybug in excitement, saying, "Now the other one." So yeah, things are not well in the woods, and these tiny people seem to have no sense of empathy. Aurora is collecting dew from some leaves for water and stumbles upon the black-haired girl with the baby. It turns out her name is Timothy and she's afraid of the other little people. She says she's different and goes into a panic, but Aurora calms her down and gains her trust. Elsewhere, the boy who ripped the ladybug's leg off now has several other kids with him and they're all holding limbs. Plus, we can see several more mangled bugs around. Not to mention in the background, the giant corpse has flies covering its face as it continues to decompose. It's really creepy seeing these little cartoon critters and then a realistic decomposing corpse in the background. One girl shows up and is like, "Why are you guys doing that?" And the kid just stares at the mutilated bug without an answer. Then he changes the subject, saying they should go look for pebbles. The little red lookout is still surveying the area when a girl shows up and says hi. Her hand is swollen up horribly and she says she scratched herself on a plant. Another pair of critters are staring at a mud puddle. They mentioned that Natalie was using this hole as a pretty good shelter, but it rained last night. One of them uses a stick and begins pulling out her body body but drops it, and the other asks if they can go now, clearly bored. This is one of the more disturbing aspects of this comic, the complete casualness the little people have when it comes to death and injury. Two people are fishing when one of the triplets from earlier shows up asking if she can join them. They give her a pole and tell her to go further down since this is their spot. A few minutes later, the other triplet shows up asking the exact same thing. The fishers think it's the same person just being weird, and then the twins start arguing with each other over who's copying who. Later, Aurora is picking up berries when Hector comes marching through. I guess he's supposed to be hunting for food, but clearly hasn't done much but walk around. He pulls Aurora aside and tells her that although they haven't seen each other much the last few days, she's always on his mind. She goes to kiss him, but he stops her, saying he can hear a wild beast nearby, so he carries on with his fellow hunters. It's kind of funny, he says, "Let's take a shortcut," but his shortcut is just really thick grass that he slowly begins to chop down, and then after only going a few feet, he says that they need to take a break. A group led by Plim are using log rollers to transport the dead girl's bag. Aurora thanks Plim for all his hard work, and in the distance we see the feral girl again. She's still hanging out by the dead girl's head, and in a really disgusting turn of events, she tears a hole into the corpse's skull and climbs inside as maggots fall out. It's really gross, and why does this girl need to look so creepy? Aurora visits Zelly in the house she's made from a tree. Inside, Zelly and her followers are putting together a dress, and one of the girls points out that it looks a little like a wedding gown. This is an important note for later. Aurora offers to put in some windows tomorrow since it's dark inside, and Zelly doesn't even thank her. In fact, she complains that she isn't doing it sooner. Aurora leaves and the girls all laugh at her. Zelly says she's sweet but a bit slow on the uptake. Plim approaches the girl with swollen hands who's about to eat a berry. Her entire arm is swollen now and her skin is all red and bumpy. It's getting to be quite grotesque. Plim grabs her berry and says, "With the state you're in, I better watch your portion so no one steals it from you." She thanks him and he walks away with her berry and then eats it himself. Damn, even Plim is corrupted. The kids who were abusing the bugs earlier have made a flower-like pattern out of pebbles right next to the dead girl's legs, but they decide it isn't quite complete. They need buttons and go running off. One of the remaining triplets is dancing by herself when a line of ants walk by. She walks along with them until they arrive at an anthill, and suddenly an ant grabs the girl by the ankle and several more help drag her into the hill. Another one bites the dust, I suppose. Meanwhile, Aurora is washing her dress in a puddle, and we see that the mouse in the coat is swimming in it. A bird stops to drink some water, and Aurora tries speaking to it, but it flies away in a sudden panic, and the mouse does the same. Aurora looks up screaming. A massive boot hits the mud, almost crushing her. A living giant man is walking by. On a nearby tree, the woman in red is watching, and Aurora is left staring in horror at his huge footprint. Somewhere else, Plim is collecting sticks and having his afro-haired admirer carry them. The kid says that the reason he liked Plim right away is because he's super cool. Plim doesn't pay any attention to him, and as he reaches to pick up a stick, a hornet lands on his back. Plim stands still in shock, and the afro kid distracts it, having it chase him instead. He runs away, luring the hornet behind, and then we hear him scream in pain, probably being stung and killed. Plim stares for a moment, and then just asks someone else to carry his wood, having no reaction at all to the kid's death. The last remaining triplet asks another girl if she can fly her kite, but as soon as she gets a hold of it, a gust of wind pulls her away into the sky. Aurora is talking to the girl with the swollen arm, which has now spread to her face, sealing up her left eye. She's making a small house for Hector out of leaves when they spot a green fly nearby. Aurora says she doesn't like that fly, and for some reason tears begin running down her face, but she doesn't know why. She runs away and sobs into a nearby piece of cloth. When it zooms out, we realize she's crying into the dress of the dead girl, whose body is now utterly covered in flies. For a moment, we see an interesting scene. The dead girl, not dead, is simply sleeping in the woods, the sun pouring down through the trees. She wakes up, looks around, grabs her bag, and begins to walk away. Then a sudden shrieking rings out. The feral girl has awakened from a nightmare. She calms down and looks out of the entryway, which just so happens to be the eye socket of the dead girl's skull. It seems the girl's body is fully decomposed and is mostly skeleton now. Looking through the curtains of hair, she sighs with relief, knowing that it was just a dream she had. Okay, so the dead girl being alive was a nightmare to her? This is getting really weird. But judging by the state of the dead girl's body, it seems quite a bit of time has passed. The little people all wake up bright and early one morning. It seems that the really big girl tried to crawl into one of the others' homes and got stuck. They mention that she's been stuck like that for 6 days, implying she's dead. We also see Hector on his knees holding some other girl's hands. We don't see what he's saying, but we can assume it's the same kind of shit he tells Aurora. Speaking of which, Aurora is gathering food in the woods when she comes upon the lady in red who's wrestling a bird to the ground. Aurora asks how she can help, and the lady instructs her to use the scissors to snip the bird's wings. Aurora looks a little disturbed by this, but grabs the scissors and follows through. With the bird unable to fly, they then tie it to a stake in the ground. Pretty brutal. The lady says she'll finish taming him when he gets tired of hopping around. Aurora asks if she's leaving for good this time, and the lady simply says that the others are lucky to have her. Later, Aurora makes up party invitations. She wants to have a party for the tiny people and the forest animals to meet each other. Some of the little people are trying to roll an apple when it suddenly caves in. Apparently it was rotten. Plim shows up and asks if they can help sew Zelly's dress, and they say first they want to give Aurora an apple to thank her for the party invites. Plim convinces them to come help Zelly instead, and they leave the tiny boy in red to get the apple. It's a funny moment, this tiny guy looking up at the massive apple and saying, maybe I'll get her a seed instead. Still staying to herself, Timothy runs into Zelly out in the woods. It seems Aurora didn't forget to give her an invitation, and Zelly takes note, saying, "You're not going to the party like that, are you? You look like a beggar." She says she'll do Timothy's hair for her, and while she does, her two friends play with Timothy's baby. One of them casually asks if she can have it, and Zelly just says, "Sure, he's all yours," to the distress of Timothy. She starts trying to leave, but Zelly demands she do the other side of Timothy's head. Zelly grabs onto her hair, pulling it back and revealing that Timothy only has one eye. They surround her, saying, "We thought you were normal." Timothy calls herself a monster and says she doesn't deserve to live here with all of them. Zelly, that heartless bitch, immediately agrees with her, saying, "Well, that's true." She tells the other two girls to grab the pencil case and that they'll have a burial. They dig a hole and put the pencil case in it, then Zelly tells Timothy to lay down in it and she'll be dead. They zip it up and begin burying it while Zelly says she'll pretend to pray. They just act this out like kids playing a game while they bury a person alive. After a bit, they decide it's gotten pretty late and go home, leaving the helpless baby alone to die in the wilderness. Meanwhile, the party is about to start and Aurora is dragging a hedgehog to the event. There's quite a feast spread out and some of the forest animals are gathered around, like a rabbit, frog, bat, snail, birds, and some mice, including the mouse with clothes. Unfortunately, there are only two of the little people. Aurora decides she'll wait a bit longer for the other guests to arrive, but soon the animals all freak out and start stealing the food. Even worse, a bird picks up the red guy and carries him away. Aurora is left on the ground covered in mud, her party completely ruined. The next day, Aurora finds Zelly, who asks her how the party's coming. Aurora informs her that it was yesterday, and Zelly says, "Oh, well, your invitation wasn't very clear." But she has Aurora sit down and tell her about it. Aurora vents about how nobody came and how the animals acted like beasts, one of them even peeing on the table. She's especially sad that Timothy and Hector didn't make it, who she reminded several times. Zelly neglects to mention the fact that she and her friends killed Timothy and just says, "How thoughtless, you must have felt humiliated." She comforts Aurora about Hector as well, saying that he probably just misunderstood, and you know how boys can be. After this, Aurora is feeling a little better as she walks through the woods. She spots several people running past her in excitement. She joins in, wondering what's going on, and they tell her to see for herself. And when they arrive, it turns out that the event everyone is so excited about happens to be the marriage of Hector and Zelly. This just seems to shatter the rest of Aurora's optimism. She sits alone under a tree. In the background, you can just barely make out the dead girl's body, now covered in leaves and becoming one with the earth. Some of the others show up and have a gift for Aurora. They've caught the mouse in clothes on Zelly's orders, who thought Aurora may want revenge on him for his part in ruining the party. They hold him still and egg her on until she finally starts scolding the mouse, saying she's terribly disappointed in him and that he ruined her party. The poor mouse looks confused and scared, and then, out of nowhere, Aurora grabs his head and gouges out his eyes with her thumbs. It's so unexpected and graphic. The poor mouse scampers away with blood running from its eyes and shrieking. Somehow, it gets even worse. The others chase after it until it finally collapses in exhaustion. The next panel is disgusting, as the remaining little people, besides Aurora, eat the dead mouse raw. They all chow down on this pile of guts and blood. One of them says, "Let's find Zelly. I kept the heart for her." It's totally barbaric. After everyone leaves, Aurora has no choice but to eat some of the leftover mouse as well. Elsewhere, Zelly and Hector sit by a small pond when Zelly realizes her ribbon fell into the water. She asks Hector to get it for her, but it's pretty far out and he seems reluctant to do so. She says, "You're my prince, right? So you have to serve me." And he finally obliges. He uses a leaf as a raft and they've tied a rope to his waist in case he falls in. Zelly's aggravated, asking if he's even trying. Then he spots something under the water, a large shadow. He frantically paddles back when he's engulfed by whatever it is. They pull on the rope to bring him back and find that he had been swallowed by a frog. The frog pukes his semi-dissolved corpse onto the shore, and Zelly asks, did he at least get the ribbon? They decide to give him a burial service like they did Timothy, but they use the same pencil case. Plim says he emptied it, and besides some small scratches on the inside, it's just like new. Small scratches? Yeah, those must be from Timothy suffocating and trying to claw her way out. Zelly grieves dramatically dramatically over Hector, and Aurora, now adorned in the pelt of the dead mouse, watches from afar. Using a paper sailboat, Aurora heads off down the pond. She reaches the distant shore and sees a wooden shack, like a big human-sized wooden shack. She finds the lady in red and the bird they tamed nearby. Aurora tells the woman she didn't want to live with the others anymore, and she simply tells Aurora to follow her. She leads her to a cozy hole in the side of the shack and tells her she can spend the night here, but mustn't make a sound because he's right next door. Aurora looks at her as if to ask, who's he? The lady tells her to look for herself. Inside the shack is a realistically drawn bearded man tinkering at a desk with something, a gun sitting beside him. He's massive compared to the tiny Aurora watching from her little hole in the wall. We get another time jump here, and it's now winter. Snow has fallen, covering the shack and surrounding wood. The red woman gets off her bird and heads inside the shack. She's greeted by Aurora, who calls her Jane. The two eat dinner, and Aurora asks if she likes it, but Jane looks concerned, asking if she got it from in his house. Aurora assures her she was careful, but Jane warns her that that man is very dangerous and that he stinks. Jane says they need to find another place, and soon. That night, Aurora sneaks out while Jane sleeps. She climbs on top of the sleeping man and uses a razor to cut off some of his hair. She then climbs a tall shelf and into a cuckoo clock, which seems to be a little hangout spot for her. She combs the bit of hair like a weirdo, saying that she likes the smell, strong and sweet like honey. She gives it a good whiff and then looks out of the clock window down at the sleeping giant. Out in the snowy cold is the blonde feral girl, freezing. She finally finds the dead girl's skull and climbs inside. Back at the shack, the man skins a rabbit in graphic detail while blood pools on the floor. Aurora runs to Jane and drags her outside. There seems to be little people heading this way. The idiots are singing loudly not too far from where the man is skinning the rabbit, and Jane runs off on her bird to stop them. Aurora follows her trail on foot until she runs into Zelly, who's now riding the bird herself, being led by Plim. She asks them where Jane went, and Plim replies, Jane? Don't know her. Aurora cries as she looks into the distance, and we can only assume that Jane was murdered by the bunch. Zelly and her crew enter the hole in the wall, and she immediately calls it a dump. But it's warmer than outside. Aurora says that they can't stay here, this is her place, but Zelly ignores her and just waltzes into the giant's shack. She tries to warn them, but once again, Zelly ignores her, and one of the girls says that Aurora needs to address Zelly as a princess now. The others look around the shack, and Plim yells out that the giant is coming back. Zelly says this will make a nice home for her, and she'll have her very own giant. They all eat dinner, and Aurora comes back late. Zelly says there's no food left, too bad, and that Aurora needs to do what she's told if she wants to stay here, starting by washing everyone's boots. Aurora pulls Plim aside and tells him she knows about a secret place she'd like to show him, but he has to keep it a secret from Zelly in exchange. Plim seems skeptical, but Aurora says she'll also be his personal servant. This gets him on board, and he asks where this secret place is. Aurora confirms once again, this is our secret, right? And Plim replies, cross my heart and hope to die. Of course, immediately after this, Plim breaks his promise, leading Zelly and the others right into the secret spot that Aurora told him about. It's much nicer and warmer in this place, and Plim tells Zelly that Aurora was hiding it. Zelly tells her, that wasn't very smart, but then again, you've never been too bright, have you, Aurora? Just then, Aurora runs outside, slams the metal door, and locks it. She runs away, and we get a better look at where this secret place was. It's the bottom of the oven. The giant comes in later, fills it with wood, and lights it on fire to cook some stew. While we don't see it directly, Zelly and the rest of the tiny people must be burning to death underneath. Aurora smiles as she makes her way up to the cuckoo clock. She looks out the window saying, I'll need time to rebuild my little nest. But it's alright, I've got plenty of time. The meal you're making for us smells good, my sweet prince. And that, my friends, is Beautiful Darkness. This is definitely one of those stories that is a little open-ended as far as interpretations go. There's a lot of weird things happening all over, and it's never overt as to what the comic is trying to say, or even exactly what type of story is being told. It's exactly the type of thing that invites a ton of reader theories. I've seen a lot of different explanations for this story, but I'll try to mention some of the most common as well as my personal favorite. One of the most popular ideas is that the tiny people are physical manifestations of the dead girl's psyche. Aurora represents the girl's innocence and idealism, while cruel characters like Zelly represent darker parts of her subconscious. You also have the feral girl who lives in the corpse, representing some primal human instinct to survive. Something I notice on a second read through is that when Aurora is about to kill the mouse, her face slightly resembles the feral girl. Her eyes are usually black, but in this image they have blue irises, and with her hair all messy and visible eyelashes, she's not that far off. This is interesting because it's right before she commits commits this primal act and loses all human civility. Another idea is that this is an allegory for the loss of childhood innocence. Aurora starts as a naive, kind-hearted leader, but is constantly taken advantage of and is slowly turned cynical by the cruelty of the real world. The other characters could represent childhood fantasies that slowly die out by the harshness of reality. And Zelly may symbolize the pragmatism of adulthood, discarding morality and civility for survival. Then there's the corrupt fairy tale theory, suggesting that Beautiful Darkness is a twisted deconstruction of classic fairy tales and how the whimsical optimism of those stories is fundamentally flawed and unrealistic. The fourth theory, and what I believe to make the most sense overall, is the idea that this is a satire on human society. Beautiful Darkness has often been compared to Lord of the Flies because it shows how a group of individuals left to their own devices will eventually fall into chaos, violence, and hierarchy. Aurora tries to be a civil and moral leader, but ultimately fails after being repeatedly ignored and exploited, while Zelly has loyal followers to the end by exploiting the other's fear and survival instincts. In this story at least, kindness becomes a weakness, and those who are willing to be cruel rise to the top. The tiny people's total lack of empathy or even reaction to death, starvation, and violence seems to represent how the weak in society often get overlooked or discarded. Now, while this is my favorite overall theory, I believe you can extract elements from all of these to piece together some interesting underlying concepts. These could all be wrong or all be right, at least in some part. I haven't been able to find the author explaining anything either, so it seems to be intentionally vague, leaving some things open for interpretation. By the way, I didn't even get into the theory surrounding the dead girl and how people believe the man in the shack killed her, but that's a whole other bag of worms. This is one of those comic books that can be discussed endlessly, and there's always new little details you find by rereading it. So let me know in the comments any interesting things you noticed and any theories you have. Well, there you have it. This one was a ton of fun to cover, and I'm really excited to hear your takes in the comments. I'm still plugging away at the disturbing comic book iceberg, and hopefully part 1 will be out soon. As always, big thanks to Kill Me Katie, whose music is probably playing right now. A lot of people ask me specifically about the song I regularly use as an outro in these videos. It's called After Tomorrow, and Kill Me Katie recently posted it on YouTube. I'll put a link below, and seriously, check him out because he's been letting me use his music since before I even had 1,000 subs. Of course, shout out to my patrons for supporting the channel. If you want your name displayed at the end of every video like these fine people, or just want to support my videos, consider joining the Patreon. But I appreciate you guys watching at all, so thank you. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.